Hello.
Hello. Thanks for being with me today, Cassie. It's a fun debate. I'm a big fan of your work, obviously. But yeah, it's a great topic. Thank you a lot for being here.
Yeah, thanks. This is gonna be fun.
All right. So I'll just jump on in. So today, as we're all aware, for the people watching, we are debating whether or not the mainstream media or the media in general should continue to publish the names or photos of mass shooters. The only definition I really think is needed here is what a mass shooting is, which is generally described as a shooting with four or more fatalities that's not gang related. So to start, I'm not advocating for the media to blast the names or photo of the people that commit these atrocities, but rather they should not restrict themselves to the point of complete censorship. I believe the main argument on both sides is the concept of whether or not we actually benefit anything from this change and whether or not we actually potentially lose anything from a said censorship. And so with that, I'll hop into my first contention on whether or not we actually gain anything from this change. So I think the media is rather that this would cause this large impact on stopping copycat crime specifically with little evidence. One of the biggest articles that discussed this recently was when the Daily Wire actually decided to stop publishing the names and photos of mass shooters. And the reasoning for such was just that they were trying to stop more mass shootings by denying these people their fame. Yet none of the sources or experts that they mentioned in their article actually came to the same conclusion. The main source they gave in the article that was actually written by Ben Shapiro himself was a statement from Kim Mills of the American Psychological Association, who talked about the impact on fame on these mass shooters, which I 100% agree that fame is probably a motivating factor. What I disagree with is that these shooters are seeking fame through their name or their visage. I'd argue that they're seeking fame through their actions. That's why they do these atrocious things. Because if you go out to the majority of people in the street and you ask them the name like Adam Lanza or Stephen Paddock, they'd have no clue what you're talking about, most likely. But if you were to say Sandy Hook shooting or the Las Vegas shooting, their mind immediately snaps to the event. And unless the media is going to stop talking about mass shootings altogether, which, I'm sure we both know isn't going to happen, I really don't think the censorship on this aspect, it's basically a non-factor to these shooters' motivations, like entirely. And I'll pass it to you and see if you have a response to that.
Yeah, so I think we end up agreeing a lot of things because I don't think the media should completely censor themselves of talking about these people. I'm not for censorship in any capacity, but I think it'd be a better decision just to choose not to use their names once the details are out there. They give the details, they say the name of the person so the local community knows who it is, and hopefully some people have some tips about the person or can talk a little bit about who they are and if they know anything was weird. So yes, you need to get the name out there because you want to know from the local community if they knew if this was going to happen or not. For instance, you saw the neighbors of the most recent shooter, and out of principle for this debate, I'm not going to say his name, the shooter in Florida, where the neighbors knew that these things were going on in the house and they saw him practicing using a gun outside and such. But I do want to point out that, yes, it was presented to the American Psychological Association, which is a really good organization, but that's not the only one. It was also presented to Lankford and Madfees, and it not only said that this does cause people to want to seek this fame, but it also says that you're kind of giving them what they want by giving them the fame. And then also it was saying that media coverage of mass shooters increases their competition to maximize victim fatalities. For instance, you saw the people in Columbine. These people wanted the attention. They wanted to get their name out there. It was a motivation of theirs to have this legacy, which they ended up getting. These Columbine shooters, everyone knows their name. I'm not going to say their name. And they have this legacy of being these mass shooters, which is crazy to think that they're not even in the top 10 anymore. But they absolutely want this attention. And yes, obviously, there's people who just have mental illnesses and go and do these shootings, or maybe they're terrorists, but I would absolutely say that copycats do happen. After Columbine, there was many copycat scares where people were really worried about these things. So I think it's a good thing not to have their name out there because why give them the attention? The focus should be on the victims who just have their lives taken from them.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I of course agree fame is a factor, and our focus should be on the victims rather than the atrocious people who actually commit these acts. But I think the current media outlets are looking at this the wrong way. Especially like the Daily Wire article is the one that really caught my eye, obviously, because that's one of the last news organizations I expected such a change from. And the reasons that have just been pushed around, I think, are a little ridiculous. Especially, I actually call hypocrisy on it, quite honestly, because if you recall, like the 2016 Orlando nightclub shooting. The perpetrator called 911 and he named the act in the name of ISIS and things such as that. And then when the government decided to censor the word Allah and any ties to ISIS from the transcript, the media, including some of the outlets I named earlier, said this wasn't the government's place, and they basically, attacked Loretta Lynch for this. I agree, justifiably, but then for these same media outlets to come back under a similar premise that, oh, we're not trying to push this message and things such as that, and be the arbiter for the information that we get. I think that's a little bit of a different story. Obviously, I agree that we shouldn't, put kill counts on the front page, and that we shouldn't, blast their face and picture everywhere. But as far as to the point of no longer publishing the names or photos of mass shooters, I have to say I think it's a little crazy in my opinion.
Well, I think using the Orlando shooting as a comparison was a really bad choice on your part, because by censoring the names of people who are going out to do this for attention, you're not giving them what they want. By saying directly why, say, for instance, the Florida shooter actually did what he did, was an ideology. It was an ideology that expands far past him. It's an ideology where people subscribe to, and there's organizations. I'm not saying he was part of the organization, because that was never made clear. But what I'm saying is these organizations are doing it, and you need to combat these organizations and this ideology. You can't combat the person who most of the time ended up killing themselves after committing this mass atrocity because they wanted to have media attention. It's completely two different things. One is people just being so consumed in themselves, and another is an ideology where they fundamentally think that what they're doing is going to bring them to heaven, or it's going to make them a shaheed or anything like that. It's not the same.
Yeah, I obviously don't think it's identical, but I think it's a really speaking example, because I'd probably argue that spreading the message of an ideology is going to have a more like echoing impact than that of posting the name of a mass shooter, right? But even when the government is restricting and censoring like the terms about ISIS and things such as that from the transcript, the media, and the conservative media especially, is still saying that's not the government's role, right? The government shouldn't do such things. They shouldn't restrict. It shouldn't be the government's concern to worry about the spreading of like this harmful ideology or the spreading of this message. And yet they sing a different song when it comes to mass shooters. So maybe I don't understand, but can you explain that a little bit for me?
Yeah, so I think it's two different things. I think it's a really conservative issue here, where the government should not be censoring anything. The people should have full transparency what the government's doing. But when it comes to your own private business, your own private media corporation, you can decide to do whatever you want to do. This is why we call it the fake news. But we don't call for the fake news to be shut down, because it's their own private corporation and they can do whatever they want to do. So if Ben Shapiro wants to not say their names, I commend him. That's his choice. That's his organization. But when the government's doing that, then you're not letting the people know what they need to know. If you want to know who the shooter was, you should be able to figure that out. By not putting their name out there, it's not that you're not informing the public about who it is, it's that you're not giving them attention. I think it's two completely different things. You can have the name out there, given out in press releases, and it could be accessible to the public, but not having it blasted everywhere, having his face everywhere, and instead having the victim's face. I think it changes the message of the shooting and of the atrocity in general.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously agree he has the right to do whatever he wants in his private corporation. I'm not arguing his entitlement to make said decision. I'm arguing the reasoning behind it above all else. Because Ben Shapiro wasn't saying, oh, well, we're just not going to post the victims on like the front page. He didn't say that we're only going to publish it once and get the information out there and then it's resolved. He specifically said they are no longer going to publish the names of the photos under any circumstances, except for if on Twitter he did clarify if they're still currently active. So if they escaped, if they're on the run, something of that nature. But when it comes to just flat out censorship in this area, I do think that's a problem. It also sacrifices media integrity, on my opinion. So if you take somebody like CNN, if CNN came out and said, we're no longer going to publish the genders of anybody in any of our articles, because if we misgender them, we think that could lead to bad effects. Most of us, especially on the conservative side, would say there's minimal proof of that being a thing, and we shouldn't sacrifice that media integrity for something that's not actually, that we can't actually foreseeable, there's not enough proof practically. And I think it's a similar thing on this idea of mass shooters, where if we're just able for the media to go and say that they want to censor the certain aspect of a news story that I believe does come at a cost for, little to no proof, in my opinion, I don't really see how that's a healthy media environment. I'm not arguing that they shouldn't be allowed to do it legally, but I'm just disagreeing that it's necessarily the best choice.
I just don't see the correlation there either, because by not putting their names out there, you're not doing a disservice to anyone. It doesn't matter who these people's names are. What they did was already done, especially if they passed away already, or they killed themselves, or they died. It's completely different. Right now, the Florida shooter is still alive. We should probably know what's going on in the court case, whatever. What you can do is you can strip them of their identity. People know who they are, okay? That's already out there. If you want to look for it, you should be able to find it on a government website or whatever. But you can strip them of their identity and just call them the Florida shooter. Not give them any any attribution to his name or his face, and because those things are not important. What's important is about what happened and the victims. Those are the two important things. By not putting his name out there and giving him the attention he wants, I don't think you're doing a disservice to anyone, because it's not changing anything. By not putting his name out there, hopefully you're letting other people know you're not going to get this 15 minutes of fame by being an idiot. And it sounds crazy. I think about it, somebody would do that for fame, but there's records showing that this actually happens because people want the fame. Columbine's a great example of that.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously agree that the fame is a leading factor, but like I stated earlier, I disagree that they get the fame through their photo or their name rather than the action itself, right? Because they're practically non-identified by their name, even in the current status quo in the media. They normally don't post the name of the mass shooter in the article about their court case. They normally say like the Florida shooter goes on trial or something such as that nature, at least from what I've seen. But you talk about how it doesn't really change anything, and I'll bring up a few unique benefits. One would come with the Sandy Hook shooter, how the public was able to hold the media accountable. So with the Sandy Hook shooting, I know it was a long time ago, but if you recall, they accidentally published, they thought the shooter's brother was the one who committed the heinous act. And so they published all this personal information about him. And it wasn't actually until the public corrected CNN on the account that things, actually got fixed orderly. The other one is our ability to create basically to chart similarities and actually like try and understand more about these people. Because if we talk about ISIS, for example, like ISIS in the West, at least, is like, oh, it's this foreign evil entity, right? And it makes us very difficult to like understand why a group such as this does it, right? I think we're going to lose being able to humanize and rationally think about some of these situations if we make them like faceless and just this evil entity rather than a human being and understanding why these problems happen.
Well, first of all, there's no rationalizing ISIS. Their Salafism is it's very fundamental, and you can't rationalize it. It's completely insane, and let's not rationalize ISIS. However,
I agree.
When it comes to this issue, I don't necessarily think that. Well, first of all, I've never heard of the whole Sandy Hook, the brother thing. I was young when that happened. I must have been like 16 years old. Not really heavily into the media. But what I would say is that's CNN's failure of journalism. That has nothing to do with, if anything, they shouldn't have published a name. That would have helped it more, because they would have been waiting for the facts. That's one thing I say about these shootings. Yes, you should be reporting on it, but you shouldn't say anything is certain for at least 24 hours, because everyone always misreports everything. This happened in this shooting as well, or they said that, I think someone said there was more than one shooter, and this happens all the time. Sandy Hook, oh my God, there's still conspiracies about it because people are misreporting things right away, and the conspiracy theorists had a field day with it. So I think, one, people need to be much more careful about that. You also saw that in Las Vegas, where all these crazy conspiracies are still happening. So I definitely think they need to be more careful about their reporting. But honestly, like, it just comes down to putting their name out there just gives them more attention. You wouldn't have even known who these people's names were if they didn't do this mass shooting. Why give them the attention they want? When it comes to people who are doing it solely for attention, you can tell who's doing it for attention and who's not. Like, for instance, I don't want to use his name, but Colorado movie theater shooter clearly somebody who wanted his name out there and wanted some type of, I don't know, some legacy of some sort of him being insane and evil. But I don't see the benefit of putting their names out there everywhere. I don't want to see their face. I don't. I want to see the faces of the people who passed away, and I want to honor their legacy.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So for one, you talk about the media being more careful as they report this information. Of course, I think that's important. But you talked about how they just shouldn't have published the name. But the problem was they were publishing all these things of the brother, right? They're publishing his workplace, his records, even though they included his name, whether or not. That's the reason they included his name was the only reason that the public could hold them accountable. And so I think in an instance like that, it is, of course, helpful. Apologize, lost my train of thought. But no, like, I mean, this comes back to my original point. I don't think if I went out on the street and asked people, like, do you know all these 10 names of mass shooters, they've had any clue what I'm talking about, besides like possibly some of the more recent ones. But of course they know the incidents that happen, because those get blown up in the media. And ultimately, I think that's where the overwhelming majority of fame comes from. It's because of that legacy, like you spoke of. And I think that has minimal correlation with like their name or their picture necessarily. I know there were statements from I think it was a letter that was left by the Sandy Hook shooter, where he said he wanted to affect America for the longest, like the biggest way he could, leave the longest lasting impact on the culture of America. And this is the way he chose. And, I don't think he really cared what his name was. I think what mattered to him at that moment was the action that he was taking place and how that was going to affect the country. And so I really think, using this idea of fame, and then stretching it as the media has to, oh well, if we censor their names and their pictures, then they'll have less of an incentive. I just don't really see any concrete evidence towards it to go all the way to actually censoring, as these media organizations have done.
Well, you're not showing me any evidence of it being in favor of it. The only studies that have come out have shown either no, it didn't change, or yes, something did change. And obviously, you can't really have a case study because no one's really doing it besides the Daily Wire. But there is evidence that these professors have figured out, saying that yes, it might have some impact. Even if it has a little bit of impact, that could save a life. Isn't that worth trying?
Yeah, I agree. Saving lives are always important, but I think if we're going to jump to the level of censorship, then we need to already have those studies concrete, right? Like even the own studies that were cited by the Daily Wire, for example, they did not even. I think they brought up the name. The whole idea of using the names is brought up like once in the essay, and it was tied in correlation with blowing up their picture. It didn't actually specifically, call out the effect of their name being in the media or of their picture. It just talked about mass coverage generally, which I agree is a bad thing. But I think the science needs to be concrete in what actually effect this is going to have, rather than us just jumping to conclusions to trying to get something done and possibly sacrificing media integrity.
Well, I don't think it's media integrity. This isn't even complete censorship. This is just not including someone's name. I recently wrote an article about a neo-Nazi that decided to confront me at UC Berkeley, and he's running for Senate. Didn't include his name. Want to know why? Because I didn't want to give him a platform. He's running for office. He wanted to act like an idiot to me. I'm not going to give my platform to this idiot. So I didn't include his name. I said basically described him, didn't say his name, didn't want to give him any more legitimacy than he should have had. And I think that was a good idea on my part because, hey, he didn't get a platform for me. He went there to disrupt me, to get attention, didn't get it. Instead, I got to expose somebody who was acting like an idiot. But so that's my own example on that front. But also, I think it's important to mention that there aren't a ton of mass shootings like the left may act like there is. So you can't really have too scientific of evidence that it's definitely working, because there really aren't that many mass shootings. Like, yes, they happen, and none of them should happen, but you're not going to be able to get an accurate sample size when these mass shootings are going to happen because you don't know when they're going to happen. And it's really hard to survey the public and figure out what mass shooter was inspired by who. But it's definitely positive or probable that some of these mass shooters were inspired by each other, especially like serial killers and stuff. A lot of them will follow the ideology of other serial killers, which isn't necessarily a mass shooting, but it's still, still in that level of evil. But honestly, this debate isn't too like intricate. It's basically whether you think it should be or whether you think it shouldn't be. So I think the Daily Wire is doing a great thing. They just don't want to use their platform to give this guy any airtime. And I think it's really, really respectful to focus on the victims instead.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously agree that I've said that so many times. So I agree that we should focus on the victims rather than the shooters. I don't think the two have to be mutually exclusive. I don't think we have to refuse. I don't think they have to refuse to publish the names and the photos of these mass shooters to focus on the victims, right? I think that information should still be available to their, readers and their subscribers, right? And you talked about your platform and your incident. I did see that on Twitter. The video that you posted. But yeah, I mean, I agree. For that level, for somebody that's running for an elected office, to not have give your platform and your viewers over to that person, but with their name. But the reason that people are normally the first thing people try and look for after a mass shooting occurs is how terrible was it. And then like who did it are the main two things, right? And that's because the who did it is very important, right? It's one of the main things they tell you in like media is who, what, where, why, and when. And
well,
things
let's be honest for a second. What do they care more about? The name of the person who did it, or how old he is? Does he have a mental illness? Where does he go to school? What religion he is? That's obviously something that people ask when it comes to these things. What's more important, the name or the things about the person?
I mean, I agree. The things about the person, absolutely.
So what's the negative side of not including a name or face?
Because for one, they probably can't include as much as that information, right? Or else people are going to be able to figure it out to themselves. Because I think this is where the divide is. When I look at these incidents in the media specifically, I don't think of it as just they're refusing to do their name for some random reason or publish a name. It's because they're trying to stop the message about that person, right? Like they're trying to not give her their platform, as you said. And so I think if we're going to try and restrict the information that the public has about them, that's going to come at a cost to all the other information we know and hurt us from identifying trends. And then the thing I talked about earlier is also making them faceless and makes it harder for us to try and come up with solutions for these issues, because now it's this evil entity rather than a human being.
Like I said before, I don't think that the issue is his name. I think the issue is him as a person. So what about him made him do what he did? His name doesn't change anything. Whether his name is Bob or Jim doesn't change what he did. So I don't think including the name is really a big aspect of this at all. And I also want to point out that the media makes so much money off of these things. Whenever a mass shooting happens, a terrorist attack, they're making bank. They're making so much money. They're getting all the headlines and people clicking on them and seeing their ads and all of that. By the Daily Wire no longer including this guy's name and not writing feature pieces on him or anything like that, they're actually probably going to lose some clicks. They could have more clicks his name, and then they can have, oh, this is all about him. Look at these pictures of him shooting people, look at the video of him shooting people, and people will get clicks on that. I don't want to see the videos. The Columbine videos, I've seen them and they terrified me growing up. That was one of the scariest things you could see, sitting in school one day and you code gray on the intercom and you're afraid that maybe it's on a drill. Maybe this is happening at your school. So I don't think those things are important to see. I think it's important to talk about how to prevent them rather than show them.
No, I obviously agree that that
you agree.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like
Dave Rubin over here.
Yeah. But no, it's obviously that we want to focus on the living and things such as that and how to fix these issues. But I think we have to agree that there is some there is some idea of how people affiliate with people versus some faceless organization, right? Or some faceless entity, as I've said. So if you say something like Adolf Hitler versus Nazis, they carry a slightly different ring to them, because with Adolf Hitler, we can be like, he's from Jewish background and he was blinded in World War I. Compared to Nazis, it's a blanket term used for evil, right? Or if you're right wing nowadays, that term gets thrown around a lot. But yeah, so I think being able to rationally come up to these and logically think about these problems, I think it does hurt that in a significant way. And I agree once again that Ben Shapiro he's doing a brave thing, and I will commend him for that, because he probably will lose his advertisement subscriber money. And I do appreciate that he's trying to do what he believes is right over trying to make money. I definitely commend him for that. I don't think it's the proper way to go about this by saying that with minimal evidence, we believe that censoring this part of our news stories will somehow have an impact on mass shootings, and therefore we will now restrict ourselves and the information that our readers and subscribers get. I go to the Daily Wire, especially when I read articles from them, because I'm trying to get, a certain perspective from them. And I think by, basically sending your readers somewhere else already kind of muddies the waters a bit, and as far as how the story gets told, because you're correct, there is a lot of misinformation out there. So I do think we are losing some opportunity cost from, getting rid of the name and the photos from these outlets.
Well, first, Hitler, he deserves to have his name out there because he was an elected leader and he had power that was government based. So you need to talk about these guys. You need to call them out by name. But these lone wolf randos who grab a gun and try getting fame and trying to make a name for themselves before killing themselves, or I don't know, trying to make sure that they're remembered. I don't want to remember these people. I don't want to have their names in my history books. I'm mad that Columbine is so talked about in the Virginia Tech shooter. These guys, we should not be talking about them. We should talk about what they did. We shouldn't be talking about their names. They should not have this legacy. Nobody should remember them. Everyone should forget them because they are such garbage human beings that they shouldn't have any memory whatsoever. And to your point about Ben Shapiro, absolutely that people are going to have to go to different websites if they want the name. But then again, I just don't see the importance of it. I'm more focused on these poor kids who had to go through that thing. But I would say when it comes to local media, I think it's important to have the name out there because the local public can give information to the police about why it happened or more information about the shooter.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that last point. Once again, that's actually something in the Virginia Tech shooting, I believe, where it's the local media, after the name was published, some of his teachers came forward and reported, issues they saw. I think that is very important. But even on a national level, I think a similar effect can occur we're able, because if I live in Georgia, I've lived in Montana for part of my life. If something bad happened and I heard about it in Georgia, I can still contribute in some way, even if that's just a small percentage of the time. I think it's still important when we're trying to come to solutions to these problems. But yeah, I mean, I agree that Hitler and people such as that, they're elected officials, and so they deserve this fame. But even some of the other, like, just absolute monsters of the world, that do acts such as this. It's still important for us to be able to logically think about why they do it and how to stop people from doing it, rather than prompting them up as like this faceless evil entity.
I don't think it's necessarily a faceless evil entity. It's just having their names not there. When you're talking about these shooters, especially the South Carolina, North Carolina. See, like, I only know his name because his name has been all over the media. The one that shut up the church. He has like this whole legacy now, and there's actually like a lot of neo-Nazis and racists. Okay, there's not a lot of neo-Nazis and racists in our country. However, there are groups of the really extreme ones who like see this guy as a hero. They have his name everywhere. They look up to this guy, and he did such a horrible thing. And you have these fringe movements based around him. So I think we just need to not make these people have a legacy. I think it honestly comes down to that. That's the only point I can go back to, because I think that's just the most fundamental thing. But I do appreciate how agreeable you are.
I try, but here's a question. Do you think that these neo-Nazis that formed practically this cult around the shooter, do you think they would still have this cult if the media refused to publish their name and they only knew of his acts but not his actual, biological name?
I think they would know who it was, because obviously, like I said, the local media is going to have to publish it. But by having this guy being featured nonstop, like, oh, he's this racist, he believes this. Here's a picture of him with a Confederate flag. Here's a picture of him with a bunch of guns. They're looking at him like, wow, this guy's a great guy. Like, some of these guys are looking at him like that because they also are insane and have these weird fringe ideologies. So yeah, I think by having a lot of exposure to him, it could definitely win people over.
Sorry, wrong button. But no, it's interesting you brought that up because, like I talked about earlier, being able to identify trends and things such as that. So just as the neo-Nazis, after the information is published, to be able to identify, well, this person, had a Confederate flag and he owned a bunch of guns and things such as that, and the information they get off of him because that information is published, can't we as the public, or as rational thinking humans, identify similar trends to try to figure out the type of people that commit these acts and the things surrounding them, so we can try and find solutions to these problems, perhaps culturally?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways that we do that already. When it comes to this type of neo-Nazi ideology, I'm not talking about Islam, I'm not talking about mental health, I'm talking about this neo-Nazi ideology. Obviously, the alt-right, I'm like one of their favorite people to attack all the time. It's my good old Israeli flag over there, which you can't see in the camera. But
yeah, you and Ben Shapiro.
Yeah, I'm apparently Jewish, even though I'm not. But anyways, these guys, I've seen young college students interact with kind of the alt-right. They're hearing some edgy ideas, they think it's cool, and then they get sucked right into the alt-right, because the alt-right isn't like the KKK. You're not having a bunch of like, I don't mean to offend anyone, but like a bunch of like people down south acting all crazy, uneducated, just racist for no reason. The alt-right, these are people who have philosophers they look up to, they read a lot, they're highly educated, and they base their beliefs off of a lot of Nietzsche, actually, is what they love Nietzsche. But they love, they love using intellectual arguments, which wins a lot of young college students over. And I have had people that I had to sit down with them, like, what are you talking about? Stop interacting with these people. These people, if you're exposed to it so much, you're going to start believing in what they believe. And I think when it comes to these mass shootings as well, it's a little bit different, where you're not sitting down with people and having conversations with them, but by being exposed to them and seeking out these ideologies, you might run into some of these alt-righters that might bring you over to their ideology. And I'm not saying the alt-right's going to go shoot up schools, because I think the alt-right is more of an online movement, but definitely there's exposure to them.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I'll have to, exclude that comment about down south, Atlanta, Georgia, born and raised. But
okay,
yeah.
I'm just saying you probably have more KKK chapters down south than you do here in Massachusetts. Just point it out.
Probably true.
I lived down in Savannah for a little while, so
I went to high school in Savannah, so and then that's
I lived in Fort Stewart.
Yep, I know exactly what it is. Yeah, that's the KKK's national headquarters in Savannah.
So,
Not proud of that one, but yeah. So I think it's we're agreeing on a lot. Of course, the ideologies are important. But I still think we do come at a loss. We are losing something with the censorship. I think it is important. Like one I talked about, the rationalizing and coming up with problems. The ability, like we agreed on the local media for others to try and come forward and come to these things. But I think it will also impact. I haven't talked about this much, but impacting the other information we know about them. So it'll be very difficult, and just the strain of trying to publish all the other information while excluding the information that would lead to his name and things such as that, right? Because I don't think it's as simple as and they would just replace the name of the mass shooter with Florida school shooter or something of that nature. They also want to make sure it's difficult for people to obtain his name and not give it that platform and push his ideology.
It's not even making it difficult. It's just not blasting it out there.
I mean, see, we agree on this. I think not blasting out there is important, but I don't get that message when I see any of the people actually suggesting this change, or at least the majority of them, like especially like the Daily Wire article that I've mentioned several times. I didn't get the message from that we just don't want to blast his name. It was that we are refusing to publish his name or his photo, based on the principle of we do not want to push his message practically.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to the whole censorship thing, because I think we're using the word censorship incorrectly. And so I brought up the definition of censorship, and I want to read it to you because I don't think it applies here. Censorship is the suppression or prohibition of any parts of books, films, news, etc. that are considered obscene, politically unacceptable, or a threat to security. That's not why, none of these reasons fit under why you wouldn't use his name. You're not using his name because you're not giving him what he wants. He wants his attention, you're just not giving it to him. It's not because it's threatening necessarily, even though we said that it could stop other shootings, but it's mostly not giving him what he wants and giving him a platform and inspiring others. And it's not that it's politically unacceptable. Yes, you can publish his name, that's fine. It's just not giving him, it's not playing into his hand, is the way I see it.
Well, places such as like don'tnametham.org, which I believe came after the Virginia Tech shooting. I think it's two of the parents of one of the victims lost in that shooting. They started this whole movement, and several doctors and people such as that have come in on this, and they talk about the fame aspect, and that's one of the main things brought up in Ben Shapiro's article, is trying to stop copycat shooters in the name. And so I think that would fall under like their censorship, as they think it's a threat to security, right? And that's specifically why I'm using the term, is because they're trying to justify it under it being a threat to security. And that's specifically why I chose to use the term. But the media being the arbiter on whether or not we get to actually, the information that we get with minimal evidence to suggest that it's a actual threat to security, that's kind of why I have the issue, and that's kind of where I draw the line when it comes to the censorship and things of that nature. If the media came out with all these articles, and let's say there was some new APA press release that said, yes, we have done significant testing, and we have found that the name and the photo of mass shooter is like a significant factor in people that try to commit these crimes, and it's going to have a big effect, or let's just say an effect. Let's say it stops one mass shooting ever. It has an effect on whether or not these incidents happen. Then I could perfectly get behind it. What I don't get behind is jumping the gun preemptively to censorship under basically a false premise, in my opinion.
Again, I don't see it as censorship. I see the security aspect of it as we could look at it at two different angles. You could look at the angle of in the United States, where we won't publish certain things. Like, for instance, you're not allowed to publish where our diplomats or even our some of the people in the administration are overseas until they've already left. So like when Jared went to Iraq, they weren't allowed to publish articles that he was in Iraq until he was either leaving or he was in a secure location. So that I see as a security measure. And then obviously they use censorship in the time of the Soviet Union or something to make sure people weren't rising up against the party. That was their interpretation of security. But here I think it's not necessarily security. It's not starting an ideology. So it doesn't mean that necessarily that if you publish a name, you're going to inspire someone. It's that you can. So it's more of a principle thing instead of something that's absolutely ensuring our national security.
Well, I have to disagree. I mean, I think even just the
Finally.
yeah, fine, we got the one, but no, it's like with a threat to security and maintaining order and things of that nature, right? This has been used to justify restriction on rights forever in the United States, and so when it comes to something such as a threat to security used to justify things in the nature, I want to ask, do you think that the media censoring the Orlando nightclub shooter, even though he had no ties to ISIS, was a threat to security, that was justified under a threat to security because they did not want to push his message?
I don't think it was a threat to security. The problem there, it wasn't necessarily the media doing it. The media was doing it, but it was the government doing it. The government should be open to the public in all circumstances. It's the media choosing how to convey the message that is open to them. But also, I almost just said his name. Also, when it comes to the shooter, in that case, his father had some sketchy ties, which is why everyone was really concerned that he might have had some sketchy ties. And then they still found things out about him that was, he wasn't a formal member of ISIS, but he did subscribe to that ideology. And that's important to mention because obviously terrorism isn't necessarily just organizations, it's also ideologies. It's absolutely fundamental Salafism.
I agree, but do you not think it's the same for school shooters then? Because most of these school shooters, or just mass shooters in general, a lot of them actually do subscribe to some sort of ideology, as far as like the way they perceive the world, not necessarily as much to like a religion, but they do certainly think of the world differently than we do, as far as like their value of life and things of that nature. And so, do you think that is comparable to something such as the Orlando shooter proclaiming his act in the name of ISIS?
Well, I'd ask you, what's the ideology of mass shooters?
So generally speaking, they don't value life. It's the same thing as serial killers. They obviously don't value it to the same extent we do. That's why they do these atrocious things. Like we talked about earlier, they look at the victim count in another instant, and they wanted to get like the higher score. They're very sick people. And I think that's very comparable to something like the ideology of ISIS. Just I believe because we've done so much to make ISIS this evil entity, it's more taboo to say ISIS and think about their ideology compared to practically the death cult ideology that's that of mass shooters where they don't value human life.
Well, you just cited two things that I don't think is an ideology. They don't care about life and they want to kill as many people as they want. That's not an ideology. That's a motive. This is what these people are trying to accomplish. Just because I go to the grocery store and I want to go buy as much food as I can doesn't mean I have the same ideology as the person next to me. I don't think it's an ideology at all.
That's fair. I have they share common values in their goals as mass shooters. Is that more fair?
Well, honestly, I'm thinking back to all of the mass shooters that have happened in the last, say, 10 years, and I can't think of one thing that they all have a similar ideology on. Some of them had mental health issues, some of them were racist, some of them were terrorists, some of them wanted detention. I can't think of one single ideology they all have. Ideologies have to be very specific. There has to be a set of ideas that they all subscribe to, and I don't see that in these mass shooters at all.
Well, one of the ideas that we are probably I can say almost with certainty that they all subscribe to is that they do not value human life necessarily. In several instances, their own life. So I think that's definitely a deciding factor when it comes to their values. Maybe ideology wasn't the correct word on my part, but certainly as far as their values go, I think that's certainly comparable to something such as the values of ISIS and radical Islam.
Well, also, if you look at some of the actions of these shooters, for instance, the one in Florida, some student left the bathroom and he looked at the student and told them to hurry up and get out of here. Things are going to get bad. So it wasn't that he just walked into school and wanted to shoot everyone. I think he must have been targeting specific classrooms or something because he had a chance to kill another student. He didn't do it. So I don't think it's like, okay, let's go to the school and let's just kill as many people as we can. I think he had more of like a plot in his mind about how exactly he wanted to execute it. Obviously, he wanted to kill people, but it's very strange that he was kind of selective. And also, Columbine did the same thing. They were walking up to some people and shooting them and not shooting others. So I don't think it's necessarily just like they have these values of like, let's go in and kill everyone, like as many people as we can. Why weren't they killing people in the street? They were killing people in the school because that's what they wanted to do. I don't really see how any of these people have anything in common besides the fact they went to a school to kill people. Their motives behind it aren't the same.
In those two instances, you're correct. They're not identical. But like, let's take other mass shootings, like the Nevada mass shooting, for example. They did not really find any reason as to why he was prompted to shoot at this specific crowd. Besides, there were a lot of people grouped together. I don't think they've come back with any concrete motive for that. Possibly one exists. Something like the Sandy Hook shooter. I don't believe, to my knowledge, he had any ties to Sandy Hook Elementary himself. It's just because he wanted to kill people and knew that's where he could get the most casualties and have a lasting impact. Similar in the Dark Knight shooting, the movie theater shooting. It's a similar premise. They just wanted to kill as many people as possible, and I think in that it is fairly random. In how they select their victims. It's not selective as it was in Florida or in Columbine, but I think it still has shared the lack of value of human life.
Well, I thought it was very interesting how you said you wanted to have a lasting impact. What was the lasting impact they were trying to get out of, or that he was trying to get out of Sandy Hook?
He was trying to impact the country. It's through tragedy. I believe was specifically like the reason, because I know there was the letter that was left behind that he left with his mother. But I believe he was trying to leave a lasting impact on American society through tragedy.
What was the impact? What exactly did he want?
He didn't go into detail as practically a suicide note for the majority of it, because he did plan to die in his act. But I'd assume to upset American society through this tragedy, through these loss, obviously the parents of these people. He didn't talk about like necessarily a political motive, but of course that has been theorized that he wanted to impact American society through things like gun control and things of that nature. But none of that's ultimately concrete. But we do not know what his end goal was. But we do definitely know he did have a motive for impacting American society in his letter.
So what does he get out of impacting American society? Because I don't think it was just, oh, he wanted to change gun control or anything like that. I think it was also he wanted his name out there. He wanted to go and be remembered as whatever twisted remembrance he wants. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me that people that would want to have their names remembered by doing terrible things. I guess it's just having their name remembered in general. But I think it was more of that than it was him trying to change American society, because I don't think he cared about American society. If it was caring about American society, I feel like we would see political motives directly stated.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously don't think it's something like he wanted to affect gun control or change American society for the better, and this was an example. It was more of like he was an, anarchist. He wanted to, upset the natural order and things such as that, more than like a concrete political motive for like a specific idea that he had or something of that nature.
Yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense. But if you also look at the church shooting in the Carolinas, that was a clear political motive. We know why he did it. We know why he went insane and thought that was a good idea. But the other ones, well, this, even if it is political, they can still be doing it for attention. Because I think he absolutely wanted attention, which is why he took all these twisted photos of him with guns and all of that. But I think the ones who aren't specifically politically motivated, the only other options you can have to look at are terrorism, mental illness, or wanting to have attention or a legacy. Or I don't know, some of them might even be doing it just to piss off their parents, to be honest. It's an act of rebellion as well.
Yeah, I think those are all valid, but then it once again ties back to my, opening argument, which was about how they actually achieve this fame. Because, you and I probably know the names of mass shooters, but I promise you, if I go out into the streets of Atlanta, 100 people probably couldn't tell me the names of the Columbine shooters. Unless they were, specifically up to date, because their names are perishable. They will fade as the story fades. The events live on eternally, and that's where they get the fame. So if the media is going to, give up, the sweet little nothing for, practically no perceived benefit, I don't think it's a wise movement.
Well, I would say the Columbine one would be a little bit harder because it's a little older. But I think if you went outside and you asked people who shot up a Carolina church, I keep forgetting if it's North or South Carolina, who shot up a Carolina church and was as for a racist motive, I think a lot of people would come back to you and say his name. I think if you asked who did the shooting in Florida, obviously people that's a little bit more ripe. I think people would know. I think if you said who shot up the Pulse nightclub in Florida, I think people will tell you exactly who did it. I'd say general, obviously, we have man in the street videos asking people what the capital of America is, and people don't know what it is. But I'm saying if you go to a college or you go to even a city and you interview many, many people, I think the majority of them will know the names.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think some of the more recent shootings, they will obviously agree. And, it's difficult because, like 1 out of every 16 Americans in New York think chocolate milk comes from chocolate cows. But if you go to a college campus, something of the nature, they probably would be able, some of them at least, to give me the names of recent shooters. But I'm sure even the ones who couldn't give me the names still remember these events, right? Because I believe Columbine actually took place before I was born or shortly thereafter. I don't know the specific date. But,
it's 91, right?
yeah, so it did take place before I was born. But yeah, and you know, they can probably describe what happened and things such as that. And if I said the Columbine shooters, they could instantly snap to that, you know, realization. And but like I brought up earlier, the names don't have that same effect. And so I think targeting the names and putting like this blame and this idea of fame on the names and the photos when it basically has had no proven significance to the actual issue is a little bit foolish in my opinion.
Well, I want to point out that Columbine was 1999, so I was like 4 years old or something, or 3 years old. Yeah, I was 3 years old. So obviously I was young for that too. I'm not really sure how old you are. How old are you?
18.
18.
So 99. Yeah, I was born in 99.
You're younger than me. So yeah, I just think that not including the names is non-actor censorship. In conclusion, I think it's mostly just having principles for your publication, choosing the way it's run, and talking about the victims more than the mass shooter. And obviously we can disagree on that, and that's good. And I had fun doing this.
Absolutely. I hope to see you around more. Thank you so much for accepting the debate.
Yeah, let's do some type of Middle Eastern debate in the future. That's where I like getting into it.
There's plenty of people on here that'll take you up on that, I promise.
It was awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.